As we stayed safe by staying at home, some of us reread our favorite YA books and got to thinking, why are YA books so relatable? How exactly do YA authors pick which teenage fantasy to write about? Luckily, our featured Anvil authors for today share their inspiration behind the relatable teenage fantasies in their books and their invaluable advice for aspiring teen fiction writers. To start off, I'm happy to introduce the first of three panelists. She is a writer based in Sydney, Australia, with over 16 years of local and international experience. Several of her works have been published in the New York Times and Al Jazeera. She finished her master's degree in communication under the ASEAN Scholarship at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. She is the author of The Girl Between Two Worlds, The Girl Between Light and Dark, and her latest book, The Search for a Dharma. Please join me in welcoming K.M. Levis.
Hi everyone, all the way from Sydney where it's winter, so I'm wearing 3 layers of clothes. Okay, so I'm going to start my presentation about YA and writing teen fiction. Now, for me personally, it wasn't a conscious decision to write YA, to write teen. The character came to me one day I was just thinking about it, and I had this vision. So this is like The Girl Between Two Worlds, the first book. I had this vision of a teen girl locked in her room, and there's smoke coming out of the door, underneath, and the mom is like looking outside the door. I was like, why is there smoke coming out of my daughter's door? When in fact the girl inside the room was trying out the Capres cigar, who the Capres like outside her window on the tree, hanging out with her. So they were hanging out together. So that was the image in my head, and that never happened in any of the books I've written, and maybe I'll use it someday. But that image was so strong in my head. It's like I had to write something around this character, and that's how I ended up writing The Girl Between Two Worlds. The story kind of grew out of it like that, because I did wonder, when my daughter grows up and starts hanging out with friends, would there be a Capre outside her door where she can be, smoking the Capre cigar? But I don't know. It's like, that's how it ended up, and it kind of continued after that. So when I'm writing about teenagers, the first thing that I really need to focus on, aside from the world building, is the character. When the character is solid, the storytelling becomes believable. Not to say it's not an easy thing to do, because it's not easy creating a character. But for me, I believe that once you know the character, the flaws, the strengths, the annoying habits, it'll be easier to know what they'll do in certain situations. Once you give your character a problem, they'll find a way to solve it that's believable to their habits, their beliefs. They can probably solve it immediately because that's their skill set, or not solve it immediately. So it really depends on how solid your character is. One thing to remember when writing about teens, though, is to remember that teens, and this is something I applied for myself as well, my teen years is very different from the teen years today, and even the teen years 10 years ago. So depends on what era you're writing, or who are the teenagers, like what year are you writing, because the teens today have different issues, different tools, different ways of reacting to certain things compared to when I was growing up, to when my mom was growing up. So it's absolutely worth doing your research, especially if you were born in the 70s or early 80s. You have to do your research about how these teens are solving their issues today, especially the teen character in 2020 now, especially the COVID era. The teens are going through a different thing again. So research is really key for me. In terms of my writing process, the thirst in tackling teen issues, the first 2 books and the 3rd book, I had to do different things, because for The Girl Between Two Worlds, and the girl between light and dark. My characters were normal teenagers. I mean, I know they have powers, but they went to school, they hung out with friends. So it wasn't hard to write them because I know what today's teens are like. For the main character, Karina, so I wanted her to have a different outlook in life than her other classmates. And I believe that being a migrant was what did that for her. When you're a migrant, which is I drew from my own experience as well. When you're a migrant, it's automatic thing that you have that's like already different from everyone else. And then I wanted to see what it's like if I gave her problems. So I made her mother disappear, and then she has a dad, but kind of not totally present. So again, it made her life even more difficult. And then she's dealing with being an outsider of school because of her background and her circumstance. So those were her issues. But for the Search for Adarna, that was a very different thing altogether because the characters, for those who have not read The Search for Adarna, it's a retelling of Ibong Adarna, but the characters are like Kardashian-like rich. So I'm like, I don't know anyone like that. I'm not like that. So I had to do my research. And luckily we have social media and we have the internet. And so how do, Google, how do rich kids spend their money? And so luckily I found a lot of them on social media. So the three girls, I had to figure out the personalities of these three girls in The Search for Adarna as rich kids with this background. But even though the protagonists for all the books are, different, they tackle the same issues: being an outsider, keeping friendships, finding young love, dealing with parents. Because in reality, a lot of teen issues are still the same in just different degrees. So my advice, tips and tricks for writers who want to tackle teen in fiction is that know your characters first and foremost. And no matter what world you're building, no matter if it's fantasy or realistic or whatever it is, the solid character will make your story convincing. It will extend the suspension of disbelief. So study the character first. Go to conferences and writing festivals and see what they say about character building. And study the issues that teens are facing through whatever means you can. Read other people's works, study them, and then you can start creating your own character. One thing you have to remember is don't make your character too perfect, because we all have flaws, weaknesses, and also weird habits. That will make your character more believable. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. KM, for your insights regarding character and the journey of your main character, Karina, in your latest book, The Search for Adarna. For our friends here today, you may use the Zoom chat box if you have questions for Ms. KM. She'll be happy to answer these in our open forum later. Moving on to our next featured writer, we would like to call on our next resource speaker. She studies law during the weekdays and writes on the weekends. She graduated from the Ateneo de Manila University with a Bachelor of Fine Arts major in creative writing in 2015. She played chess from high school until college. Now she's playing the game of life. Ang larong nakukas sa atin is her first novel. Please join me in welcoming Esperanza Trampe.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fe, and I'm going to talk about writing teen fiction. I'm a fan of Fessy, so I hope that it's okay that I share my screen with you right now. So, share. Okay. As we've said, my name is Fe, and my novel is Ang Larong Nagwakas sa Atin. And it is a young adult novel that featured two high school chess team players meeting, becoming friends, butting heads, and falling in love all within the span of a few years of high school. And right now, I'm going to talk about why I decided to write this book. Before I could ask myself that question of why I decided to write teen fiction, I had to ask myself, why do writers write in general first. And I found this very nice article from George Orwell, who said that primarily writers write because of sheer egoism, aesthetic enthusiasm, historical impulse, and political purpose. Sheer egoism because, well, writers are vain, and I'm not even going to deny that. Aesthetic enthusiasm because this world is very beautiful, and our language that we use to communicate in this world is also very, very beautiful, and also it's really something that binds us all together. Historical impulse because we see things in this world, and behind the things that we see are truths and facts. And political purpose because having had all of these, there's something that we want to change. There's something that we want to see more. And as such, I was able to answer why did I write teen fiction. And I wrote teen fiction because I grew up as an only child and I didn't have anyone to talk to. So I wanted to say something and had no one to say that to. So I started writing. And in writing, I felt like I was being heard. I wrote teen fiction specifically because I believe and I think that adolescence is such a weird and colorful time in all of our lives. Sabi nga ni Taylor Swift, when you are young, they assume you know nothing. Pero when you are young, like you see the world in a different light. There are hues, there's filters to everything. And at times it can be jarring, and at times it can be so exciting. And I think that I'm not the only one thinking that, because the experience of being a teenager is universal. We have all experienced getting our hearts broken, failing a test, meeting with friends, like the little things. So having gone through all of that, I still see that I wish there were things that have been different when I was growing up. And I hope that someone, when I was my age, someone had told me that I could have done some things better, that there could be things that I was able to have more agency over. So I decided to write teen fiction. For me, what you really have to get right about teen fiction is the struggle, because the struggle is real. Well, adolescence is a hard time. Like looking back, when you are older, you're going to say that, oh, we didn't have it that bad. But when you're a teenager, everything is magnified 10 times because these things are all new for you. And on one side, you're just a kid, and on the other side, you're practically an adult making life decisions that will have to affect so much. And you don't really know how to do that. So the uncertainty of it all is what is really important to take note of when you're writing teen fiction. You have to internalize the struggle of a teenager. I know that being a teenager, like Miss K.M. Levis said, when I was a teenager and when she was a teenager and right now, it's very different. But at the core of it all, we still have a lot of the same struggles. So we have to look at those struggles and see them in a way that a teenager of today would empathize with and would be able to relate to. I wrote Ang Larong Nagwakas sa Atin usually through a set of events. They say that we do not remember days, we remember moments, and even as a kid, I did not remember some events of my life from a week before. I started writing Ang Larong Nagwakas sa Atin when I was 18, and most of the feelings were still fresh, but only a few things really stood out for me. And that was how I was able to start writing Ang Larong Nagwakas sa Atin, because I set out an outline of what are the major events that a teenager usually goes through during high school. For me, there was a sports fest, there's graduation, entrance exams, and around those events, I tried to picture what happened and how the characters felt during that time, because how a character feels during that specific time or that specific moment in their lives is what really makes that moment memorable. And when you're able to translate that into written word when you're writing a novel, you'll be able to get to know more about your character. You'll be able to share how your character feels, and you'll also be able to look forward and think about and hint at what your character might be able to do in the next few chapters that will follow. So that's basically how I approach writing ang laro. And my other tips for writers who would like to also publish their works in teen fiction is write what you know, and also research, just like Miss K.M. Levis, what Miss K.M. Levis said. Because you can't write something about chess, for example, and not know anything about chess. If you must, you have to research, because writing is you're telling a story. And when you tell a story, you're telling information to another person, and that information has to be credible. Second is write a story that only you can tell, because if you remember that a few months ago, someone had tweeted to Neil Gaiman asking him to write a story about Philippine mythology and folklore, and then Neil Gaiman denied this because as talented as Neil Gaiman is, he cannot write a story about Philippine mythology and folklore. He cannot write a story that only a Filipino writer can. So I hope that to all those writers out there, you write a story that only you can tell, especially considering the Own Voices movement right now. And I know that story is knocking in your heads because it's a story that needs to be told. It doesn't have to be super deep, doesn't have to tackle all of the hard issues. It can be light, as long as it's something that has to be told, it needs to be heard. And there's a message that you're telling through that story. And the most important for me is you just keep writing. Because I started writing this at 18 and it took a while for it to get published. If I'd stopped writing, it would not have been published at all. You can't call yourself a writer unless you write. And then after that, you have to let your writing go, because your writing will serve no purpose in your laptop or in your USB or hard drive. It has to be shared to the world. It has to reach other people, because I'm sure that you have a story that will benefit other people. And not everyone, I'm not going to sugarcoat it, not everyone will absolutely love your writing, but someone out there will. And really, sometimes when it feels so discrediting to continue writing, just holding on to that one person who will love your writing is enough for you to go on. That's it for me. Thank you for listening to my talk. Yeah, stop sharing.
Thank you, Beth, for sharing your insights and your journey as a writer. We'd like to remind everyone that you may use the Zoom chat box if you have questions for Beth. She'll be happy to answer these in our open forum later. For now, let's call on our last panelist for today's webinar. She is a freelance writer who took up BA Creative Writing at the University of Philippines, Diliman, where she graduated summa cum laude. She's currently taking up law at Manuel L. Quezon University. When she has time to spare, she enjoys reading and writing fiction. Bola Bola is her first novel. Please join me in welcoming Anna Haronga.
So, hello everyone. I am Anna Haronga, and my first novel is entitled Bola Bola. It is a young adult romance novel which features Thea, a 220-pound late bloomer who has to deal with her mother's incredibly high standards for beauty, her insecurities about her weight, the pressure of getting into her dream university, all while keeping up with her boy-crazy friends. Her life becomes more complicated when Lucas, her kuya's best friend and her longtime crush, returns from the States. So Bola Bola is a coming-of-age story. So what made me choose to write teen fiction? To be honest, I was required. I wrote the first few scenes of Bola Bola in my Writing for Young Adults class, CW151, under Sir Gerardo Las Baños. I was in college, writing about teenagers, writing about high school. It was for class, but I was also reminiscing, because I was in that same position not so long ago. I wanted to write a coming-of-age story where my protagonist had to deal with all sorts of problems, not just school stuff, but her love life, her relationship with her friends, her relationship with her family, her relationship with her body, her relationship with herself, teenager stuff. Sometimes we forget that teenagers have to deal with all this and more at a time in their lives when they're experiencing so much growth and so much change in a short amount of time. There is so much to unpack there. Young adult literature, teen fiction, is a great avenue to deal with all that. When I had to do my thesis, Bola Bola became my creative project. From a draft in a creative writing class, it turned into my thesis, which later became my first novel. My thesis was about food, sexuality, and the female body in young adult literature. For me, when writing about teenagers, one of the most important things that one should consider and hopefully get right is the issues you're tackling. Yes, you're telling a story, a love story, a coming-of-age story, but you're also making a statement. I wanted to talk about body positivity and sexuality in a progressive manner. When you're a young woman, you have to live up to certain expectations. Some of these expectations serve as limitations on what you can and cannot be. How do you tell young women, teenagers, that they can be thin, they can be fat, they can be whatever shape they want to be, that they can need, and they can want, and they can desire, and not be punished for feeling such things? I'm talking about guilt, I'm talking about shame. It has been said that one of the functions of young adult literature is to provide its target readers with a realistic portrayal of the world, as it is, and how it should be. As such, discussing controversial topics like broken homes and sexuality becomes inevitable. We need to give them enough information that would allow them to make a decision for themselves. As developing individuals caught in the middle between childhood and adulthood, teenagers, young adults, seek literature to understand themselves and the world they live in. So when I was writing Bola Bola, I had to figure out how I would deal with body positivity and sexuality without being preachy and didactic. We can't help it, we're adults, but we need to convey a message. We live in a conservative country, so I also had to figure out a way that would allow me to talk about these things. According to Sir Los Baños' article, You Can't Handle the Truth with Reality, Censorship, the young adult novel, published in 2006, there are no local books for YAs dealing with sex. And when I was doing my thesis, in my interview with a Filipino author, when I asked her how female sexuality, particularly teenage female sexuality, is portrayed in Philippine YA, in substance, she answered, there is none. Value is placed on women waiting or not giving it away. So how do we go about this? I learned from one of my professors, Ma'am Lorena Santos, that one can make use of different literary strategies. One can make use of abstract imagery. I used figurative language. I used food as a metaphor. Descriptions of persons being compared to food, preparation and cooking of a meal, consumption. Because my goal was to find a way to talk about these things, to create a conversation, not to titillate nor to terrify my readers. I use cooking as a way for my character to express herself, her thoughts, her feelings, and I use food too to to help my readers relate to my characters. Real and relatable characters are important after all. Flawed characters. We cannot give them filtered, squeaky clean versions of reality if we want them to understand. As for tips and tricks for writers who want to tackle teen fiction, so here are some of my general tips. If writing is really what you want, pursue it. If a prompt, a premise, a line, a scene, an image come to mind, write them down. Thoughts are fleeting. Write them down, type them on your phone, record them. You'll thank yourself later. As someone you trust to read your work, feedback is valuable. Keep writing. Writing is like a muscle. Keep writing to get better. Don't wait for that big idea or for a masterpiece. Just keep writing. And after writing, let time pass before you revise. It will be easier for you to revise later. Lastly, one of my professors once said that there's a story out there that only you can write. And I believe this to be true. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna, and thank you to our other two panelists, KM and Beth. This brings us to the next part of our program, the open forum. And I see that you guys actually already sent in your questions. So let's see, where shall we start? So, okay, let's see. I think this one let's start off with one where all three can answer. Question 1, how do you find or create an idea to begin with your novel? So we will have Miss KM start, and then Fe, and then Anna. Okay, take it away, Miss KM.
For me, it's really random. Something when I'm watching a movie or when I'm reading a book, or really a what if that just comes to mind. For the Go Between Two Worlds and the Go Between Light and Dark, they're all because of my daughter. I've said this before in some of my panels that I thought she needs to be able to read something about my mythology, because she lives in Australia. She grew up here. She wouldn't know anything about Filipino mythology. So for me, it was really because of her that I wrote those two books, because I wanted her to see this when she's old enough. It has horror elements, so I said, okay, she can probably wait until she's 12 or 13. She read it when she was 9. She snuck it into her bedroom and said it was the best book she's ever read. And to me, I said, okay, I can die now. That's it. I'm done writing. So yeah, it was for her. The search for Adarna was because I was like a bit miffed that I could see all these Western fairy tales being retold in so many books worldwide, and thinking, where is our retelling of our Filipino mythology? Why hasn't anyone done that? And I thought, well, I should make one then. So the search for Adarna is a retelling of Ibong Adarna when I was growing up in the Philippines. One of my favorite tales when I was at school. So I thought, okay, well, how do I bring Ibong Adarna into the 21st century? It's like, well, Kardashians, that's it. So that's how the search for Adarna ended up becoming like that. It takes me a while to form these ideas, so maybe a day and then another day and then sometimes a week, months. Some ideas even take years, and then I revisit them. So, never underestimate where these ideas can come from. Just be observant of your surroundings and be observant of what you're going through.
For me, I think that inspiration can come from anywhere. Like, you can see a taco vendor and then get a story from that. And what I said earlier, you should really write what you know and write a story that only you can tell. So for me, I wrote Laro because I was a chess player in high school, and growing up, I didn't really have any books to look to that really was written in Filipino, first and foremost, aside from Ibong Adarna and Noli Me Tangere, and I really couldn't relate to that. And Harry Potter and The Hunger Games, like, they were good and they really made my childhood, but they didn't tell me how it was to be a Filipino teenager, like having to have all of your decisions informed by your parents, having to have all of these religious constraints imposed on you. So when I started writing Ang Laro, it really just came from a prompt, and I remembered my chess playing years. And then when you get a prompt, you write it down, because whatever that is, it can be of use in the future. So I wrote it down, and it started as a short story, and then I just kept working on it until one day you're ready to share it with the world.
Starting is always hard, isn't it? I agree with Faye, you can get inspiration from everywhere. Sometimes I would go back to my notes. I have a habit of writing down ideas, scenes, and dialogue that came to mind. Sometimes I would listen to songs or watch movies and series looking for something that would inspire me or move me or something. And when an idea comes to mind, it can be a scene again, or a line, or even a song. And hopefully when you're ready, you can expound on that idea and try your best to write about it. Thank you.
Next, okay, thanks. Okay, we have more questions. This one's addressed to, let's see. Okay, these are for all authors. How do you keep writing every day while dealing with school, work, and for some people, fear and insecurity? And we'll go the usual order, so Ms. KM.
Okay. I have this thing. It's different each author. I'm just telling you now. It's a different process each author. What I did was look at what every other author that I love to read, what their process are, and then I try them all. So one of the things that worked for me is 30 minutes a day. It's because I know that my focus will be this 30 minutes. And in this 30-minute block, I can write 1,000 words if I need to. And it's straight, it's focused, and that's it. After that, I can do whatever else I want, which is not like I have leisure time if it means work, chores, anything to do with family related. So that means that I've already done the 30 minutes of writing that I needed to do. It's not, in the ideal world, okay, I'd be doing this all day, but I'm not in the ideal world. So I had to find time. I took it like I would deal with my job, which is prioritize. So for me, 30 minutes a day, just work enough so I can still do my day job, I can still be a parent, I can still be a wife, everything else, I can still watch K-drama, important stuff in life. So that's what worked for me, but it's different process each author. As for Insecurities, you are your own worst enemy when it comes to that one. So do not listen to the demons, just write like no one's watching, like dance like no one's watching, write like no one's watching. Don't care about, put blinders on, run your own race. Don't care about what others are doing. That's for me.
So yeah, just as Miss KM said, it's different for everyone. I don't write every day. And I'm not a bad writer because of it. Like, we all work in our own timeline, we all work in our own pace. And I think that what really motivates me to write is when I have a certain goal in mind. Like, if I have a story, what do I want to happen with this story? Do I want it to just sit in my laptop, or do I want to submit it for a contest? Do I want to get it published? I really have to like always have an end goal in mind, because otherwise it's just going to just lay there, and I'm just going to be like, I can do it some other time. If you set deadlines, you'll be able to meet these deadlines and have a finished product by the end of it. And although you do set deadlines, it doesn't have to be super strict. It can adjust to how you work. Yeah, you have to discover yourself in order to find how you're going to go by a process. Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, it's hard. When I was writing Bola Bola, I had classes, and the hardest thing was concentrating on a task. What if an idea comes to mind during class? You try your best to write that idea real quick, then you go back to listening to your professor. After that, I try my best to write during my free time in the morning, as soon as I get home. And all my other hours, I would read cases and textbooks for class. You try to manage your time. But of course, we don't get to follow our schedule on the dot, but we try. You always try. You sit down and you write, and you allot a certain time for that. As for insecurities, they don't go away completely. It's something we learn to live with. But you need to remind yourself that the story wouldn't finish itself if only it can. As writers, you don't only write for your readers, but you also write for yourself. If you want to know what happens next, that's what should push you to write, I think.
Thank you. Okay, thank you guys. So let's move on to our next question. This is once again addressed to all three of you. How do you create a round character? How can one avoid creating stereotypes? Okay, you can start off with Dan.
Okay. It's hard, isn't it? Because sometimes we want the character to be what we're not, like super this and super that. And we want them to be perfect because that's what we're not. But the thing is that it's not real. No one is like that. I mean, God, if you know anyone like that, tell me. Maybe Gal Gadot? I don't know. Wonder Woman? Maybe she definitely still has flaws. We all have flaws. For me, although I super like physically maybe they're pretty or whatever, each person has insecurities. I think it's for me to just dig deep into that one. I must admit I am chismosa. When I meet people, I listen to their stories, and I think it's also part of being a journalist. I listen to their stories, and then I read between the lines, and in my head I was like, this person will become a good character in the future. And you kind of tuck away those little qualities of the person in your head, and then you write it down. And then when you're creating a character, you kind of remember, oh yeah, I remember that one. She was so pretty, she was perfect, but then she said this, and just kind of, she is insecure about this. And so you end up forming this person, this three-dimensional character. Yeah, for me, be chismosa. No, not really, don't. You can look around, observe, see what your friends are like, your parents are like, your neighbors like, and draw characters from that. They're everywhere, I'm telling you. Just, shut up and listen to them. People do say sometimes that, like, you don't talk, you just stare and listen. I'm like, yeah, because I'm, writing about this, and maybe you get murdered in the next book. You never know. So they're everywhere. Observe your surroundings.
I don't I don't treat my characters as characters. I see them as people. So they're not just some stereotype in my head. Sure, they're based off of some people that I know or some just ideas that I float in my mind, but they're not just this one thing. So you have to understand that, like your friend, you can only see this part of your friend, and there's so much more to your friend. So you have to think about your characters in that way. And when you see the whole picture of your character, that character comes alive for you. So it will be able to move on in the story as more organically because you know your character and you know what the character is going to do, and you can also play off how these certain characters will interact with the other characters in your novel and create a full-fledged story where all of the characters are not just plot devices or like extra, but rather people who go through something and go past it. Yeah.
I agree with Miss KM. I'd love to be like Wonder Woman. Yes, but they're not real. That's a problem, right? One method that I learned and which I want to share with you is making a table and listing down everything you know about your characters. Physical traits, what they look like, socioeconomical, their background, and emotional, their wants, their needs, because they're not always the same. Their fears, if you can. By listing all them down, they become real, and their flaws and their strengths naturally show themselves. Also, it's hard to root for perfect characters, mainly because we can't see ourselves in them or people we care about. They don't feel real. The needs that they have, the fears that they have, they're not the same if they're too godlike.
I wanted to add to what Anna said, which is like, yeah, godlike characters, they don't exist. And listing down all these things, the flaws and what she mentioned, that's a perfect way for you. Next time you forget, okay, what's this character got? You go back to that list of what you did. Include stuff like who does this character have conflict with? Does she hate her mom? Is she close with her dad? Anything you can think of about your character, write it down somewhere, and then you can refer to that. If there's a problem that you need to solve, you can go back to that list and say, oh yeah, okay, this is how she's going to deal with it because she's like this. So yeah, that will make your life easier. Okay, that's it.
Thank you guys. Okay, we have another question. This time, okay, it's once again addressed to single one of you. So, how does one decipher that he or she is actually writing a young adult fiction novel? Is there a certain style or language of young adult fiction?
Oh wow, it's blurring these days, isn't it? I don't know, because it used to be when I was starting anyway. It used to be that YA, they shouldn't swear, there should be no sex, there should be no this, there should be no that. That was the genre that I knew, but now I don't know. I mean, guys, turn on your mics, let me know, because nowadays it's so different. I think just the age of the protagonist, I guess, is what makes it YA. Even if they have sex, even if they swear, it doesn't matter. If the age is 16, then it's YA, isn't it? What do you think?
I agree. The age. Because these characters, again, are experiencing something at a time in their lives where they're in the middle between childhood and adulthood. That's what they have in common. That particular time in their lives. Because right now, that particular time, it's not only a date or a year or an age. No, but it's actually different life experiences and being exposed to different things at the same maturity level, or if not maturity level, emotional maturity level. So it's hard, but I think it's the age of the protagonist and the age of your target or audience.
Yeah, true. Because it's not the same as before anymore. It's like anything goes now. Because every teenager is going through different things, right?
I agree with my co-speakers. I think it really is the age. And as much as we really do write about teenagers, we write thinking about a teenage audience. I don't think that we should box whatever we're writing into just, oh, this is young adult, and we have to just stay to that box. We can write whatever. I mean, we have to write. We have to let the story create itself. Because if you just think that, oh, it's young adult fiction, you're going to limit yourself and you're going to hurt your story in the process. So I just encourage that those who want to write young adult fiction to not be constrained by the fact that you're writing young adult fiction.
Okay, thanks guys. Okay, so this next question is addressed to Ms. KM. So young adult fantasy has a strong presence in YA fiction today. So the question is, how do you build the world if it were under the fantasy genre? And you did a lot of world building. So take it away, Ms. KM.
That's the fun bit. You get to be God. Building your own world. Yeah, there's no limit. Actually, there's no limit. But having said that, it's very difficult because fantasy world, you have to make the rules. That means you're God. God made a lot of rules. I mean, can you do that? You have to write down the creatures in your, not just the creatures, but the characters of each creature and the world they live in, how they eat, how do they sleep. All these things that normal people is just gonna do in real life, you have to create these things. My suggestion is to create a Bible. So before you start writing, create your Bible. By Bible means the world. Write down everything you can think of that you want to put in the world and how they interact with each other. So it's not a novel, it's not a story yet, it's just like a guide on how your world works. So that way later on when you're writing, you don't get confused as how your world works because you wrote it down. It will take a long time, so you have to be patient because world building is quite hard. Sometimes you can just, write it and then see what happens later on, but the problem is you won't get the consistency, making inconsistent kind of future because you don't remember it if you don't write it down. So my suggestion is when you create the world, write the Bible first.
Thank you, Ms. KM, for those tips on creating world building. This next question is directed to Feth. Asking on behalf of everyone who wants to start writing how to write if you're not confident in writing in English and using words that are not common. So Feth, if you're not confident in writing Filipino, take it away, Feth.
Okay, so if not everyone knows yet, my novel is in Filipino. And it's not that I can't write in English, it's just that the story itself it was supposed to be in Filipino. Like I couldn't imagine it in any other language because that's the language of my soul and my heart. And I don't think that we should worry about like language so much, not like the technical parts of language. We don't have to worry about that because when you're writing, it actually ends up to be the problem of your editors because your job is to tell a story and convey the story, and if you're not confident in your English, why not write in Filipino? But you can also like make that a strength in your writing. Like it can be the voice of how you write. You don't have to look at your weaknesses as weaknesses per se, but rather think about it as something that can benefit you later on and something you can also improve on.
Thank you, Feth. Okay, so my next question is for Anna. So your book deals with female sexuality and romance, but mostly on body image and everything. So you were able to write that despite, our country being very conservative in terms of those themes. So how difficult or what were the challenges you encountered in trying to deliver this topic for such an audience that's known to be conservative in culture. And this can apply to other themes such as sexism and LGBTQ fiction. So, yes, take it away, Anna.
Okay. While I was doing my thesis, I didn't find any local YA that dealt with sexuality positively. You can't just tell teens to never think about it, never talk about it, and hope for the best that by the time they're adults, they're knowledgeable enough. If only, but it doesn't work that way. So I needed to find a way to talk about it. I used food. I used figurative language. I needed an instrument that would allow my characters to articulate their thoughts. It's one thing to think about it, another to speak about it, and talk about it, and start a conversation. So figurative language was the way to go. I used food. Because in theory, I thought maybe through food, my character, Thea, would be able to share how she feels in such a setting or in such a time when everybody else is telling her, don't talk about it. Because, again, it can't be like that when this is their reality. So you have their talk about sexuality, sex, LGBTQ. This is part of their reality, and by not talking about them, by not giving room to talk about it, to talk about them and to talk about it, you're ignoring them. And what does that say? So I feel like we need to keep up with the times, and the times require that these issues be talked about. So I used metaphors, and I'm hoping that it works. I guess it works, sana.
Thank you, Anna, for sharing that. Okay, so I saw this question in the chat, and I think I should answer this. How do we get publishers to notice our works and take us seriously since we are generally young and new authors? So to my young and new authors, if you feel that your story is ready to be submitted, please feel free to submit it to our submission portal in anvilpublishing.com. There are guidelines there to help you propose your novel. For me, I believe that your application, make sure your application is very persuasive to me, and that make sure that your premise is very well worded so that you can hook me in. So, okay. So...
can I add to that one as well?
Oh, go ahead.
One of the things is edit your work. Not once, twice, 3 times. Because if you have this one shot of sending your work to the publisher and it's full of errors, you're never going to get another shot because they just look at it and say it's not very professional. So edit, don't rush it. Just take your time, just edit your work. That's it.
Anyone want to add to that? No? Okay. So this is going to be our last question. So, and this is addressed to all 3 of you. We all know that most readers prefer international best-selling books. As Filipino writers, how can you encourage Filipino readers to patronize original Pinoy literature?
This was asked. Somebody asked me about that before, and I can only base it on what Australia is doing because Australia has the same problem. Although we have a lot of authors here, local, people still buy a lot of international ones, American ones. So they do want Australians to read Australian books. So what a lot of the organizations here, writing organizations here, are doing is school visits, a lot of one-on-one, one-on-one talks. The problem is COVID happened, so yeah, we'll have to do webinars. But yeah, a lot of that is FaceTime with the audience, actual FaceTime, especially if they're young, especially with young children and young adult readers. FaceTime with them is very important. having that chance to sit down with them and talk about the book, talk about the roots of the book, talk about the culture, it's an essential part of the process. Gone are the days when you write and then you hide in your cave. I think having that interaction with readers will bring that enthusiasm back to our own books. That's for me.
I also struggle with this issue because growing up, I didn't really have a lot of Filipino works. And now that there are more Filipino works out there, I think like what we can really do is just lift each other up, because like a friend might not be able to know about this certain book but would love it. So you have to really spread the word out there. And usually it's just friends like trusting each other's words, because it's hard to like, you can't just put a banner out there, oh, buy my book. You have to have someone really have read that book, and you have to have trust in that book, and people have actually liked it, that sort of thing. So I think that we should just really support each other, and I think that as writers we should never see our community as a competition, just like a support system, that we are all trying to make this Philippine literary scene more alive and more colorful each and every day, especially now na it's Buwan ng Wika, and I hope that we can support our local authors during this special time.
Love local, support local, please give it a try. If I may be allowed to compare Philippine literature with food, writings by Filipinos are filling too. Nakakabusog din naman. So, give it a try. Maybe, I think it's because we got used to the idea that the works of Filipino authors are confined in one section, Filipiniana, which is, interesting because we are Filipinos. This is the Philippines, and you'd think that all these books shouldn't be confined in one shelf. But again, I feel like we have to retrain our minds that works by Filipino authors not only reflect our reality, but our lived-in reality, if I may add, but they are works by our fellow countrymen. So love local, support local. Thank you.
Just one more thing before we close up, that I can see a lot of questions on the chat box that we haven't answered, and I'm sorry because we're running out of time. Guys, feel free to contact us. DM, Facebook, Messenger, email, whatever. We're online. We're all online. So if you have these questions, we're not gonna bite. Well, I can't bite. I'm in Sydney, but we would love to answer your questions because there's a lot that we haven't answered. So reach out. We promise we'll try and answer them. I mean, what else are we gonna do? We're in lockdown.
Thank you, Ms. KM. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Anna, for your sharing your insights and your time, and the invitation to ask more questions beyond the webinar. So, sadly, we are nearing the end of our program this afternoon. I would just like to ask our panelists if they have a message for everyone here with us on Zoom today. As always, let's start with Ms. KM.
Keep writing. Don't stop. Who else is going to write that thing for you? And again, if you have any questions, reach out to me. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Keep writing.
Thank you so much for joining this webinar. And in response to the last question, how do we encourage people to support more, to read more Philippine literary works in contrast to international works? This is the start, being here and listening to fellow authors who have their works ready for you. We can work toward a more inclusive and more welcoming Filipino literary scene. Thank you so much.
If writing is really what you want, pursue it. We only live once, so write whatever you want, write, and don't think of other people's opinions. Sure, some are valuable, some are good and constructive criticisms, but you also write for yourself. So remember, you're not only writing for your readers, you're also writing for yourself. Thank you.